Nora Hayes was the kind of woman most people forgot about the moment she left the room. She did not mind. She had spent years learning to be invisible, and by the time she moved to the small mountain town of Ashvale Ridge, she had become very good at it. She rented a small house at the edge of the town, close enough to walk to work, but far enough from the center that nobody knocked on her door without a reason. She worked nights at the local animal clinic, caring for injured dogs and cats and, sometimes, wild animals that wandered in from the forest. She cooked simple meals. She read books. She went to bed when the sky turned pale. She did not ask for more than that. It was on one of those pale mornings, just as she was walking home from her shift, that everything changed. The forest road was quiet. The grass on either side was dusted white with frost. The trees stood dark and still. Nora walked with her hands in her coat pockets, her breath making small clouds in the cold air, thinking of nothing in particular, and then she stopped. There, in the middle of the road, sat a wolf. It was the largest wolf she had ever seen. Its fur was silver and black, thick and heavy as a winter coat. Its paws were the size of her hands spread wide. It sat perfectly still, watching her with eyes the color of pale gray stone. There was no growl, no movement. Just that steady, quiet gaze. Fear moved through her. Of course it did. She was a small woman, alone on a road before sunrise, and this animal was enormous. But Nora had worked with frightened animals for years, and she knew the posture of danger. A wolf about to charge does not sit calmly. It does not hold still with its ears relaxed and its tail resting gently on the ground. It does not look at you the way this wolf was looking at her, with something close to patience. She did not run. Instead, she crouched down slowly, bringing herself lower, and she held out one open hand, palm facing up. It was the same thing she did at the clinic, a quiet signal that meant, "I am not a threat. I am not afraid. You can come to me if you want to." Then, because it was simply what her face did when she was not trying to be anything, she smiled. Not a careful smile. Not a polite one. A real smile, warm and open, the kind she gave to animals in pain, to tell them they were safe now. The wolf stared at her for a long moment. Then it rose to its feet, crossed the distance between them in 4 slow steps, and lowered its great head to her hand. Its fur was soft. She had not expected that. She had expected something rough and wild, but under her fingers, it felt almost like a dog's coat, thick and clean and warm. She stayed very still. The wolf breathed against her palm. And then, as though it had made a decision it was entirely comfortable with, it stepped to her left side and simply stood there. She looked at it. It looked forward down the road. "All right then," she said quietly, and she stood up and walked the rest of the way home. The wolf walked beside her the whole way. At her front door, she turned to it and said, the way she might say goodnight to a neighbor, "You should go back to the forest. It's getting light." The wolf looked at her. She went inside. She locked the door. She stood with her back against it for a moment, her heart beating in a way it had not beaten in a long time, and then she laughed softly to herself and went to bed. When she opened her curtains 4 hours later, the wolf was sitting on her front step. This is how it began. She named it Storm in her head, though she never said the name aloud. It followed her to work at a respectful distance and waited outside the clinic until her shift ended. It walked home beside her. It slept near her door at night. It never demanded anything. It was simply there, the way a shadow is there, quiet and constant and close. After 3 days, her neighbor Petra came rushing across the street with wide eyes and grabbed Nora's arm. "Do you have any idea?" Petra said, keeping her voice low, though there was no one else around. "Whose wolf that is?" Nora looked at Storm, who was sitting at the edge of the garden looking peaceful. "I was hoping it was nobody's," she said. "That is the Alpha King's wolf," Petra said. "That animal has not walked beside a person in over 20 years. People have left their homes when it appeared near their town, and it is sleeping on your front step." Nora was quiet for a moment. "It's very well behaved," she said. Petra stared at her. "Nora." "I hear you," Nora said. "I just don't know what you want me to do about it." She understood, of course, that this was not a small thing. The people of Ashvale Ridge began to notice. They watched her walk through the market with the great silver-black wolf at her side, and they stepped back quietly, and found other directions to look. Nobody stopped her. Nobody came close. Storm never growled, never moved toward anyone. It simply walked beside her, and its presence parted the crowd the way a stone parts water. Nora kept her head down and carried on. It was on the 6th morning that she saw the man. He was standing across the street from the market, tall and still in a dark coat. He had the kind of face that was difficult to read from a distance, sharp and controlled, the face of someone who had learned to show nothing. But he was watching her. More precisely, he was watching Storm walk beside her, and something moved across that controlled face that she could not name from where she stood. Storm's tail swept slowly, once. The man's jaw tightened, then he turned and walked away. He came to her door 2 evenings later. She opened it to find him standing there, and Storm sitting calmly at his right side, as if it had always lived in 2 places at once. "My name is Darian Vale," he said. He did not say anything else after that, as if the name was supposed to open a door she did not have the key to. Then he seemed to realize this, and added, more quietly, "I was hoping we could talk." She looked at him for a moment, then she looked at Storm, then she stepped back and let them both in. She put the kettle on. He sat at her kitchen table and looked around the small room as though he had not been inside a home like this for a very long time, a lived-in home with books stacked unevenly, and a spare coat on the back of a chair, and a plant on the windowsill that was doing well enough. He told her, when she sat down across from him with 2 cups of tea, that Storm had not chosen to go to another person in over 2 decades. He said this plainly, without drama, without flattery. He simply told her the fact the way you might report the weather. He said he had no explanation for it. He said he had come because he needed to understand. "What did you do?" he asked. "That morning on the road." "Nothing," she said. "I crouched down. I held out my hand. I smiled, because I didn't know what else to do." He was quiet for a long time after that. He turned his cup slowly in his hands, and she noticed that he had the hands of someone who worked hard, not soft, and arranged the way she might have expected. Finally, he said, "That's what I thought." She waited. "People don't do that," he said. "They see Storm, and they go still with fear, or they run, or they perform bravery, which is just a different kind of fear. Nobody just looks at him and smiles." "He looked like he needed someone to be calm," she said simply. Darian looked at her for a moment. "You should probably be around different people," she added, and she meant it kindly. Something in his face shifted. It was small, barely visible, but it was there. He came back the next evening, and the one after that. He did not make excuses for it, and she did not ask for any. He would sit at her table with a cup of tea and she would read, or they would talk about small things, the town, the cold weather coming in from the north, the stray cat she was trying to coax to trust her at the clinic. Storm would lie across the doorway between the kitchen and the hall, filling it entirely, a warm and living threshold. It was not romantic in any obvious way. It was something quieter than that. It was 2 people who were both, in their own way, tired of performing, finding that the other person did not ask them to. One afternoon, a commotion broke out near the market. A young wolf, still small, was cornered between 2 wooden stalls, snapping at anyone who moved toward it. A circle of people had backed away to a safe distance. Darian was already there, but the young wolf could not settle. It saw authority and it shut down further, pressing itself into the corner with its ears flat and its whole body tight with fear. Nora pushed through the outside of the crowd without thinking. She moved to the front of the circle and crouched down on the cold ground. She did not hurry. She did not speak loudly. She made herself small, held out her hand, and waited. She could hear people around her holding their breath. The young wolf looked at her. Its nose worked at the air. After a long moment, it took one small step forward. She stayed still. She let it come to her, and when it was close enough, she placed her hand gently on the side of its neck and kept it there, steady and warm, until she felt the tight muscles begin to release. When she finally looked up, Darian was watching her from the edge of the crowd. His face held an expression she had not seen on it before, open, almost, unguarded, the way his wolf was unguarded with her, as if she had answered a question he had been carrying for a very long time. Walking home that evening, Storm at her left, Darian was beside her for the first time without the careful, deliberate space he usually kept. just beside her, as if the space between them had simply stopped making sense. At her front door she stopped, and he stopped with her. "You do that without thinking, don't you?" he said. It was not quite a question. Do what? Trust things. She considered this honestly. "I stopped trusting people for a while," she said, "after my marriage. But animals? They don't have the words to lie to you. They just show you what they feel. I find that easier." "Yes," he said, and the word came out with the weight of someone who had been waiting to hear exactly that. Exactly that. He said goodnight. She said goodnight. She watched him walk away down the road with Storm at his side, the wolf looking back at her once before the dark took them both. She stood in her doorway for a while. The forest was quiet and full of stars. She realized, standing there, that she had not felt afraid of anything in almost 2 weeks. The trouble came quietly, as trouble often does. Word reached Ashvale Ridge that a rival group was moving through the Northern Territories, looking for any opening they could use to unsettle the Alpha King's position. His beta, a serious man named Kale, came to her door one afternoon, while Darian was away. He told her she may be at risk because of how visible she had become. He told her it might be wise to leave town for a while, just until things were settled. He told her, with the careful frustration of someone who already knew the answer, that Darian would not ask this of her himself. "Why not?" she asked. Kale looked at his hands for a moment. "Because he does not ask people to leave who have not chosen to stay," he said, "and he will not allow himself to ask you to choose." After Kale left, Nora sat at her kitchen table for a long time. Storm was in the garden, lying in a patch of late afternoon sun. She watched it breathe, slow and steady, and she thought about what it meant to make yourself smaller so that nothing could reach you. She had done that before. She knew exactly where it led. In the morning, she was still there. 2 days later, walking home along the forest road in the early dark, she heard footsteps behind her. 2 men she did not know. They did not speak. They did not need to. The intention in their movement was enough. Storm appeared from the shadows of the tree line, as if it had been waiting there all along. It stepped between Nora and the men and stood absolutely still. No growl, no display, just a wolf the size of a small horse, with pale gray eyes, looking at them with complete and steady calm. The men looked at the wolf looked at the men. The forest was very quiet. They left. Nora's hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against her sides. Storm turned and walked back to her, and then it pressed its great head gently against her ribs and held it there, warm and solid and still, until she stopped shaking. "Thank you," she said softly. She was not entirely sure she was talking only to the wolf. Darian found her on the road 10 minutes later, moving fast, his face sharp with concern. He stopped when he saw she was standing and whole and calm, and something released in him visibly. A long breath let out slowly. "Are you all right?" he asked. "Yes," she said. Then, because she had noticed he always answered that question with a single firm word, whether it was true or not, she asked, "Are you?" He was quiet long enough that the answer was clear. She crossed the space between them and placed her hand against his arm, just resting it there, the same quiet, steady gesture she had used 100 times with animals to say, "You are safe here. You do not have to carry all of that alone." He went completely still under her hand, the way animals go still when they finally believe the touch is kind. "You are allowed to be that too, you know," she said gently. "Just a person. Not only the Alpha King, just Darian, who is worried, and relieved, and tired." He looked at her, in the dark of the road, with the forest on either side, and Storm sitting quietly nearby. He looked at her, without any of the careful distance he usually carried, and she saw, very clearly, the person underneath all of it. Not frightening at all. Just a man who had spent a very long time being seen as something other than a man. She smiled, the same smile as always, unplanned and warm. He breathed in slowly. "I don't know how you do that," he said quietly. "Do what?" "Make everything feel like it is going to be all right." She thought about this. "I don't think I do," she said honestly. "I think you just forget to be afraid when you are around me. Which is different." He was quiet for a moment. Then, carefully, as if each word had been considered, "I think I would like to keep forgetting." She looked at him for a long moment. Then stop standing at a distance, she said. Weeks passed. The trouble in the north settled. The rival group moved on. The town of Ashvale Ridge returned to its usual quiet, though the people who lived there still watched with wide eyes when Nora walked through the market, and sometimes they saw Darian beside her, and they saw the great silver-black wolf on her other side, and they learned slowly to read that picture correctly. She was not afraid of him. Storm had chosen her, and those two facts together told everyone who needed to know everything they needed to understand. One morning, very early, she found herself on the forest road again. It was the same hour as that very first morning, the sky still dark at the edges, the frost back on the grass, the trees standing close and still. Storm walked at her left side, its warm shoulder brushing her hand with every step. Behind her, the lights of a house were on. Not her small rented house at the edge of town, but a larger one, set back from the road, with a kettle already on the stove because Darian had learned that she came home cold and had started putting it on before she arrived. She looked down at Storm. Storm looked up at her. She smiled, the same smile as always, the one that had started all of this, on a cold morning on a quiet road, when she had crouched down in the frost and held out her open hand to something large and unknown, and decided, without thinking about it too hard, to simply be kind. Storm's tail swept slowly across the road. Ahead of them, the sky was beginning to lighten. The forest was full of birds waking up. The world was cold and bright, and, for the first time in longer than she could measure, entirely and completely hers.